take us away.
Hey, so hopefully you can hear me. You're going to laugh. I'm also having technical difficulties on my end as well, but I'll make the best of it. So we saw some really interesting stuff happen at the internet exchange level in our region. And actually, after soliciting some feedback from around the region on how COVID-19 impacted the African exchange ecosystem, we noted that actually Uganda had where we operate our internet exchange had a particularly unique impact. But before I get to that, I'll cover some of the more common outcomes. We got feedback from places like Rwanda, Nigeria, South Africa, and others. And what was quite common is I think what people expect to see and has happened in a lot of places around the world, and that there was an initial in a lot of cases, there was an initial dip in traffic, but it was very brief during the initial lockdown phases when people were sent home from the office, followed by either a spike or a gradual increase. And in many cases, there was no initial dip. It depends really on the readiness of the economies, whether you see the dip or not. So, for example, in Uganda, Rwanda, I think Nigeria, and even Mozambique, there was that initial dip, but then in South Africa, there was an initial spike instead as companies prepared for work from home, and there were lots of patches and updates and other things that happened on quite a large scale because I think their industries were more ready to adapt to a work from home reality. In Uganda, by contrast, though, we saw a pretty dramatic dip. At the time, we're doing around 12 gigabits of traffic through the exchange, and we probably lost 3 gigs of that, maybe more, for a sustained period of at least, I think, a week or more before we saw any sign of a rebound, and it was very gradual. And it hasn't been until the last, I would say, month or so where we've really started to see more growth. And indeed, we have seen more growth. We're up, I think, to around 14 gigs now. But the initial impact of the lockdown was quite substantial for us. And we were curious about that and looked into that. And what we surmise is that a lot of the Uganda Internet Exchange's traffic is related to the CDNs and content networks that are attached to it. And in Uganda, we have a large number of fixed ISPs that provide connectivity to offices where a lot of people get their primary connectivity. The reality is that when people are sitting at the office, they're watching a lot of YouTube and they're on Facebook and doing other things that come from the CDN networks. And when they migrated from those fixed office ISP connections to mobile connections when they went home, a lot of that CDN traffic was taken away from the Internet Exchange because the mobile carriers tend to have their own on-net cache deployments. And so their on-net caches were seeing the CDN traffic instead of the UIXP traffic. Because that's what happens on the mobile networks. And then in addition to that, any increase that we saw in utilization from Zoom and video conferences like that didn't really, from our point of view, pass through the exchange. A lot of these systems are not peer-to-peer, and they get relayed through servers that are hosted by cloud infrastructure providers and elsewhere that are not in Uganda. And so we didn't see that traffic impact the exchange either. And then one of the other dynamics that we saw, which I think is probably common throughout the region, but was particularly pronounced in Uganda, is the transition from fixed internet connections, which are effectively unlimited for the office user on their laptop, to pay by the byte mobile connections. So when you're on a mobile connection, you're typically buying bundles where you pay by usage. Whereas when you're at the office watching YouTube all day, you're unlimited, and so your usage patterns are different. And people in Uganda don't have a lot of disposable income. And so when the economy shut down and lockdown occurred and companies had to lay people off, not only did they get pushed to pay by the byte mobile connections, but the disposable income evaporated rather quickly. And so internet utilization overall took a big hit. But like I said, it's not all gloom. We are back up and to the right again. And we haven't fully analyzed the cause of the rebound or the whether or not we think it's accelerated from previous growth, which was somewhat substantial anyway, or not. So I don't have any insight into that. But another interesting observation that was made by the South Africans, the guys like Andrew and Michelle down at Napa Africa, was that because people weren't sitting in traffic anymore, the patterns changed that they were seeing on a daily basis. People were getting online earlier, staying online for longer, and a lot of these sort of like peaks and troughs that they were seeing throughout the day kind of smoothed out over time. So those are just a few of the observations that we've seen. I have a few more as I load up my my data here that we'll get into perhaps a bit later. Hopefully that's bought us enough time to get Ben's video working and maybe help kickstart the conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah. So while I'm getting the, yes, so we're pulling up Ben's video now, but an interesting point that you brought up, actually a few interesting points here, but one of the interesting points that you brought up was also the fact that when they got pushed to the mobile industry, they ended up having to pay as they consume. And there's something to be said there and thought about the different let's say strategies that operators or even governments had put in place, because there are some that kind of just gave you unlimited for a while when things were there, while others were still charging. And I think that will also very much vary how the patterns and the internet and the consumption work, but maybe we can take that in the Q&A.